In an ideal world, you'd be able to get whatever wood you want in unlimited supply for the same price as pine with no environmental impact. We don't live in that world. There are woods that are downright expensive or difficult to get and have huge environmental impacts. And ebony happens to be one of those woods. If you want something that looks like ebony, the best way to do it is with stains, dyes and other methods using an available wood to make it look like ebony. Problem is, like with most things in the woodworking world, you can ask 5 different woodworkers what the best way is and you'll probably get back 8 answers. In this video, I'm going to look at 5 different ways to ebonize wood and determine which one's the best. Now, best is a really subjective term, so in this case, I'm going to define that as which one is the blackest colour, the most pleasing black colour, as well as bonus points to availability, consistency and ease of application. For this test, all the test boards came from 2 boards, one pine, one Victorian ash, so we've got a softwood and a hardwood, and they've all been prepared to 120 grit. Normally I'd prep them to 180 or 220 grit, but some dyes and some stains don't work well when you close the pores of the wood, so I wanted to eliminate that entirely by doing just a very rough job of surface preparation. So some of the inconsistencies you might see in the finish may be due to poor preparation, but I didn't want to go the other way where they just don't absorb in at all. First up is iron acetate. It's probably the most interesting, not necessarily the best, but definitely the most interesting method here. By many, it's considered the proper way to ebonize wood. You can make iron acetate by combining 4-0 steel wool in vinegar and waiting. For me, it took about 2 weeks for it to properly dissolve. Unlike dyes and stains which apply a pigment to the wood, iron acetate causes a chemical reaction with the tannins in the wood, turning it a different colour. And in these tests, we're finding that it's sometimes black. You can see on pine the reaction is not what I'd consider black, but on the Vic Ash, the reaction is considerably quicker and reaches something close to black. Since the iron acetate reacts with the tannic acid in the wood, there is a pretty simple way to boost the tannins in the wood, and that's brushing on tea. In this case, I've used black tea. The second coat of iron acetate on the Vic Ash did make things darker, but on the pine it just made it more of that poo colour. The pine with the tannin booster did turn a greyer colour, but we're still a very long way from black. Following up with the DIY iron acetate solution is RIT dye. Being a fabric dye, there is a chance you'll already have it in your house for DIY projects. I found RIT products in general popular with homemade wood stain and woodworking hack type videos. Being available from the supermarket makes it pretty easy to pick up. This is one of those leave it on to soak then wipe off excess type products, but it did tend to kind of just stay on top rather than absorbing in too much and required extra coats. MINWAX stains are your more traditional spirit-based stain. You can't get MINWAX in Australia anymore, but things like Feast Watson are pretty similar. They're what you'd normally associate with a stain product, so they're quite stinky. They will often require preconditioners on the wood to even the grain out a little bit. These have a pretty typical brush or wipe on, leave it to stand for 5 to 15 minutes depending on the strength of the colour you want, then wipe it off. The sample boards show just how varied the absorption rate of the MINWAX stain is. For pine, it's pretty passable, but for hardwood, it's just a bit of a joke. India ink, Chinese ink, and SUMI ink are pretty similar. Depending on where you are in the world, one term might be easier to find than the other. They go back several thousand years, traditionally made from some sort of soot, sometimes with a binder like shellac or hide glues. I find this particular ink goes on best if you dilute it very slightly with water for the first coat, and it just tends to brush on a lot easier then. This is the only ink in the test. Unlike the stains and dyes, this very much sits on top of the wood and is more opaque than the other colours. But as a consequence, it's really good at even application over growth rings and other discoloration. FIDDES is probably going to lose some marks here. They are a UK based company, but there are local suppliers all around the world. If there's not one for you, obviously that rules this out, but for me it's about a 20-minute drive from where I am. I really like their hard wax oil, and from the 5ml sample pot I had of their dye, I had pretty good results, so I ordered the full size container of it. This specifically mentions light proof, but I have no real way to measure it on if it's more or less light proof than the other techniques. I find this particular product brushes on best with a tack-on brush and about 10% water dilution. When you're thinking about ebony wood, you're probably thinking about that very classic pitch black wood with little to no grain showing through. One of the things that makes ebony very environmentally unfriendly is that that's only considered the good grade of ebony. There is actually quite a lot of ebony that isn't quite as dark and has more of that pronounced grain and ranges a whole gamut of browns and greys and all of that. If you're after that black, there are some very clear winners and losers in this test. The biggest loser is probably the RIP dye. Now, I didn't really have high hopes for this, but as I said, it's something that shows up in a lot of make your own wood stain type videos. It's not designed for wood, so there's no surprises there, but at least you don't have to try it now. The MINWAX is probably the next worst, and it has a lot of issues in common with traditional spirit stains where it's very fickle. On the Vic Ash, we get a terrible result. It is not black at all. Most of the stain ended up wiping off, despite leaving it for 15 minutes. On the Pine, the results are almost the reverse, where most of the stain is absorbed in, but where those growth rings are, nearly no stain is soaked in, so we get this very clear lines in it. So if you use a preconditioner, you might get acceptable results. The iron acetate was a bit of a mixed bag as well. It was kind of the reverse of the MINWAX stain. It was terrible on pine, but on the hardwood it gave a pretty admirable result. I wouldn't say it's a perfect black, but it's pretty workable. Reading further into it, I've seen some people say avoid certain brands of vinegar. Certain types of tea, like bark tea, can give consistent results on lots of different types of timber. To me, if you have to start ordering all these components online and you've got to wait a week to brew the stuff and the results aren't considerably better than the commercial options, which are 1 or 2 coats, it seems like a lot of hassle for no real benefit other than you might save a little bit of money, but probably not. To me, there were 2 clear winners, the FIDDES water-based stain and the India ink. If you view them separately, you'll probably find them pretty good. You could choose either one and be quite happy, but if you put them side by side, it's actually pretty clear that the India ink does have a bit of a leg up. The FIDDES dye has tints of blue or purple, depending on the lighting that you've got that you're observing it under, whereas the India ink, being made from soot, made from charcoal, it's pretty black. There's no other pigments in there. Looking at the other criteria, the 2 products go on pretty evenly. Both work well with a little bit of dilution and both brush well with a tack-on brush or wipe on really well. The India ink per milliliter is a little bit more expensive, but it has more coverage, so they balance out about the same. And for both products, I had to order online, so they ended up costing about the same anyway. If you end up applying an oil-based top coat, they are actually much more similar. The amber, I suppose, in the oil-based coat tends to dull those blue tones that you find in the FIDDES product, so it looks pretty much the same to my eye as the India ink. The India ink perhaps fills the pores a little bit more, but I'd put that down more to my application technique, particularly not sanding too well. Next time you want some ebony wood, if you're just after the look rather than the weight or other functions, grab some India ink or some FIDDES water-based stain and you'll get a much better result for much cheaper. Don't forget to share, like and subscribe so you're alerted of my next video on what stains make the best pink ivory look alike. Thanks for watching. That was a joke, a bad one at that. Pink ivory does exist, but I'm not going to do a video on dyeing things pink.